Good morning. I've been a student of business now for about 36 years, and as somebody who grew up with an innate sense of idealism about life and about the world, I was often told that the world really doesn't operate that way, that it's a dog-eat-dog world out there, that only the paranoid survive, and there's no free lunch, and many other such statements about business. And my journey over the last 36 years has been really to discover that a more benign, caring, conscious way of doing business actually not only can work in this world, but actually is essential and far more powerful. And that's been the essence of my work for the last 30 years, but really the last 15 years or so, I've really focused on that. And I'm going to talk today about the role that capitalism can play in healing the divide that we're talking about. Because in a way, the way in which we enacted capitalism has made that divide happen. It has given rise to many of the problems. Not all of them, certainly, but many of them. A lot of this is an economic divide. The left and right view of the world are fundamentally separated by their view of business and of work. Just a couple of minutes to talk about capitalism itself. Those of us who grew up in a system like this sometimes don't appreciate what it has done for humanity. If you look at the per capita incomes of people across the world, inflation adjusted over the last 2,000 years, you see that for almost all of that time, the per capita income globally was $500 or less. And what that means is that 90% of humanity lived on less than the equivalent of $1 a day today. So the default condition of humanity was one of extreme, abject poverty. And even in the last millennium, as we started to have signs of progress collectively with the Renaissance and with the invention of printing, and then with the age of reason and enlightenment, Newton, Galileo, etc., all of these were significant milestones for us as a species, but they did not impact ordinary people. And what did start to change that was around the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, when we had the ability to increase our means of creating productive output, and with that came prosperity. But that wasn't enough. The other big factor that elevated our prosperity was the understanding of markets. So Adam Smith, writing The Wealth of Nations, 1776, explaining how when people have freedom, so his key insight was that it's not access to resources or the work ethic that leads to prosperity, that it's really when people are free to focus on what they do well, and then they're free to trade and exchange value with others, that creates the conditions where everybody can get uplifted. So really it's about spreading more freedom if you want to create more prosperity. And that those decisions are much better made that way than having some centralized planning authority trying to decide who does what and how much is produced and what is the price and so forth. And that same year, of course, was the birth of this country, a country born from the idea of freedom. The only country in the world, actually, that has ever been created on the basis of a set of ideas. And those ideas did revolve around freedom. So freedom is really at the heart of what this society is all about. And that combination of factors in the 18th century really, as you can see, elevated humanity dramatically, not only economically, although that's a huge part of the story, 15-fold increase in per capita GDP, and of course, the United States average person about 100 times better off, but also many other indicators, life expectancy going from 28 to about 70, literacy going from 10% to 90%, our human population rising from 800 million in 1800 to well over 7 billion now. Many more people living longer, more fulfilling, more enriched, more fully human lives as a consequence of the embrace of the idea of economic and political freedom. And really, what is capitalism other than just freedom for people to engage in the activities and create value for each other and uplift each other in that process? But we also know that the way in which that has been done and has played out over the last couple of hundred years, and especially over the last 50 years or so, has caused a steep decline in the amount of confidence that people have. There's something that is not working in the way we talk about and enact business, especially as businesses grow larger. So as Gallup has found, the amount of confidence that people have in big business has really plummeted. It wasn't that high, but it's gone down to as low as 16% in 2009. There's a bunch of factors that have led to this, including the fact that we talk about business in very narrow terms. When you say it's just about profit maximization, well, you sound like a parasite when you say that we're just about making as much money as we can by taking in all kinds of resources from the world and from people and using them to our advantage. Well, that doesn't sound very inspiring and not very responsible either. So that's certainly a big part of it. The other part, there's a whole bunch of changes that have happened in the world, especially in the last 25 years, that have really also relegated the way in which we think and talk about business and made it quite obsolete. So the level of cynicism and distrust that is out there should concern us all, because collectively then we don't get the benefit of innovation and creativity that we need in order to move forward. That if we're going to continue to have prosperity and deliver modernity to the billions of people on this planet that who don't yet have it, we're going to need to innovate in every sphere. We cannot solve all of our challenges the same way we did them in the last 100 years, because we simply will run out of resources and destroy the planet. So we need all of that, and we won't get that when people are cynical and disengaged. So we need to think about where things have gone wrong. And this journey actually, I think, goes back to the early stages of our experience with free markets, with capitalism, as we call it now, when we forgot the basic fundamental truth that business is about the real lives of real people. Kind of became disconnected. Business became dehumanized, became kind of mechanized. We started to think about it in very different terms, and started to think about people as resources and assets and things like that. And we started to, as I said, lose sight of the fact that the impact that we have on the lives of people and their families is enormous. And with that, of course, comes a great responsibility. So capitalism really started as an expression of basic human freedoms. It was grounded in the idea that people were free to make those choices about what they should do. It was also grounded in a moral and ethical foundation. Many of the early capitalists were coming from the Judeo-Christian tradition, so they had those values that were really steering them when they were engaged in commerce. It wasn't just about maximizing returns. But then over time, that narrative got changed, and capitalism gradually became more, no, I wouldn't say immoral, but amoral. It was really simply a pragmatic thing about creating financial wealth. And the economists and others came along to talk about profit maximization as being the purpose of business. And no great business leader ever thought that way, but suddenly that became the accepted wisdom, that this is the purpose of business, that everything else in the world has a higher purpose, but the business people are the mercenaries. They're just about money. That's all they really care about. And this was a very distorted view, but somehow it became accepted even by business people to a degree. And business, in a sense, lost its nobility as an enabler of fuller human lives. It became a way of using people in order to make money. And in the process, also, it became a new engine of oppression. It created conditions where people were really working in ways that were dehumanizing. Certainly the assembly lines, many of the factories, the mines, etc. If you look at them, they really are very, very difficult conditions to work in. So this profit maximization paradigm that has emerged is really not only wrong, I believe it's extremely harmful and dangerous, because it does put people in the position of exploiting other human beings for a fairly narrowly defined objective. So it kind of hardwires this notion of selfishness, which is not at the root of capitalism. Self-interest, yes, but selfishness is not and cannot be a virtue. But that kind of became the way of thinking. It also made it very instrumental. It's about treating some people as a means and others as an ends, using people essentially, and very narrow, thinking about our role in the world as simply being about making money. Business does so much more. We impact people's lives in so many different dimensions. And so you had the unfolding of the Industrial Revolution, and that seemed to come with huge price to be paid in terms of people's lives. So yes, they had more money, certainly, but they were also living and working in horrific conditions in many cases. And as Tocqueville observed when he went to Manchester in 1835, here humanity attains its most complete development and its most brutish. Here civilization works its miracles, and civilized man is turned back almost into a savage. Those are the conditions that he found in factories. And of course, this gave rise to the labor movement, which became increasingly militant as people started to fight for their rights, and they really had to do that because it was dehumanizing that they were treated. And you can draw a straight line from there, I think, to the emergence of Marxism and the attraction of that philosophy to a large part of the world. Right? So this whole divide that got created, everything that followed from that, I think can be traced back to this narrow way of thinking about business, that it's all about self-interest. The fact is that this other human drive, the drive and the need to care. Adam Smith himself wrote another book called The Theory of Moral Sentiments, which was all about the human need to care. Had we integrated those two things and recognized the fullness of human beings, And we're not just about self-interest. We are also about caring. And have we somehow figured out a way to incorporate that into the way we ran as well as the way we design conditions in which people work, I think that would have been a very, very different story. So unconscious capitalism, as we would call it, gave rise to socialism and communism, I really believe. And therefore the persistent left-right divide, which is largely an economic, of course there are other dimensions to it, but the economic dimension I think is dominant there. And therefore the solution to this is a conscious form of capitalism. We have to do that because business in any free society will play a central role. This is where a tremendous amount of value and wealth gets created. This is where the resources get generated that can be used by government to fund infrastructure and do all the other, provide a safety net, etc. This is where people get the resources to be able to donate to worthy nonprofits. So what is conscious capitalism? Four basic, very simple ideas, but they're quite different from the traditional narrative. First is that business has a higher purpose. It's not just profit. In fact, profit is the outcome. It's not the purpose. If you enact a business well, if you follow a higher purpose, there's something meaningful that you're trying to accomplish in the world through your business, something that needs to be healed, some need that needs to be met. Whole Foods, for example, is about trying to improve people's health by changing the way they think about what they put into their body and providing them access to those things. So having a higher purpose, why do we exist? Every business, just like every human being, needs to ask that question. Second is about treating all the stakeholders, not just shareholders as the ends, but everybody is an end in themselves. The well-being of employees, of customers, of communities, of suppliers, of investors, of the environment, all of those things are important and critical. We impact all of them and therefore we need to factor them all in and create positive value in each of those areas. Leaders who are not about using other people as objects for their own success. That's not a leader, that's a tyrant. A conscious leader is somebody who is about service to the purpose of the organization, service to all the people whose lives are touched by it, and of course they also are about serving the future, the planet as well. The cultures, most businesses run on fear and stress. That's how we try to motivate people, and hence we have heart attacks being highest on Monday morning and many, many other sad realities about work. But cultures built upon trust and transparency and love and care, which is increasingly, we're finding, not only possible, but the most powerful companies in the world have that. So my research over the years has shown that companies that were built on these ideas, these four pillars, and which are in fact built upon compassion and caring and love, published in this book, Firms of Endearment, some years ago, and then we did a second edition last year. We find that these businesses actually also perform much better financially, that they generate a lot more financial wealth. In fact, 14-1 over the market as a whole over a 15-year period in this book, 9-1 in the original research. So there's something here that says making money is a good thing for a business. It is socially, it would be an irresponsible thing for a business not to be profitable because they are using capital and they need to provide the resources that society needs. But how you make the money is extremely important. If businesses make that money by squeezing their employees and impacting their lives in a negative way, squeezing their suppliers, dumping burdens onto the environment, onto society, then that's not worth anything. That is an extractive business. The businesses create, but they also destroy wealth. It's not just financial, it's intellectual, it's social, the amount of trust and cohesion that exists in society, it's the emotional state that we're operating from. Love and care versus fear and stress. It's a sense of meaning and purpose, which is a spiritual value. It's the impact on the culture that we have. In the United States, $1 trillion of marketing every year does impact the culture. What kind of impact are we having? The impact on our bodies and the impact on the environment. These are all the consequences of our actions. And a conscious business has a positive impact in all those areas, or tries to. The traditional business says it's just about making money and everything else is a side effect. Well, I'm sorry, there's no such thing in the world as a side effect. We do things and they have effects. Right? And we have to think about how do we create a spectrum of positive effects. And we have to get away from this idea that businesses are allowed to externalize, right? Which means, let the future or let society as a whole pay for the consequences of me making money in the way that I choose to, whether it's the environment or other factors. So it's really time for businesses to wake up and to grow up and to show up to their full role and their full potential in the world. That they have to recognize that they're not apart from from society, they are actually a part of society. That you don't think about these overlapping circles between business, society, and the environment, that there's a narrow spectrum there, and we look at corporate social responsibility and sustainability as occupying those narrow slices. We recognize that here's the planet, here's human society, here's our business. The overlap is 100%. All of business happens within society, all of society is on the planet. Everything we do impacts all of that, therefore has to be part of our responsibility. We have to grow up, take broader responsibility. What is our impact on the world? And we have to show up. We have to really engage in challenges that matter. And a quick example of that, Whole Foods Market now has a big initiative on trying to bring food into the underserved parts of the country. This is their Detroit store that opened 2 years ago. It's doing dramatically well, has had a huge impact on that community. And Walter Robb has talked about this. The way we bridge this left-right divide is by truly engaging in positive action, by showing up and actually doing things, and engaging with that community and talking about them, and bringing in local suppliers, and now giving them a place to not only shop but to congregate and to create other enterprises that arise from that. And of course, moving away from the idea of debating and towards dialogue, I think, is a theme that is consistent throughout this notion of how do we bridge this left-right divide. So again, I think this is not a question of left or right, it's really a question of rising higher and moving to a higher plane of consciousness in everything that we do, including business, but everything else. And when we do that, those divides start to go away, and they start to look a little bit silly, actually. Thank you very much.